Welcome back, everyone. Hope you're doing well today. We are starting off 2019 with a brand new video, and we're going to be talking about the different types of hitters and how to pitch to them. Now, before we get into the video, I wanted to let you know that I will be doing 366 days of content in 2020, which means whenever I'm not streaming, there will be a video out here on YouTube. But that also means we're doing things a little bit differently. So if you've been a long-time supporter of the channel, I urge you to stay till the end of the video and check out what I talk about and the different things that we're going to be doing here from here on out. But let's get right into this video. So people have been asking me to do a pure analog pitching tips video, and if I was to go show you my ERA right now, it's not pretty. So there are a couple things that I can talk about that I think are my strengths when it comes to pitching. What I am really bad about is my actual inputs, and I tend to hang a lot of pitches on certain days. I'm just a very, very streaky pitcher. So some days I can throw 4 or 5 straight games of 3 or 4 runs given up, and then some days I'll just get blown out on the pitching side. And the major difference there is my input. Some days I just can't time it up properly. What I usually do well on a day-to-day basis is I try to figure out what my hitters' patterns are and try to exploit that. So when I'm in a game, when I give up runs, I feel like a lot of time it's because I didn't push the analog properly, and rarely when I hit my spot do I give up runs. And before we talk about the actual patterns that these hitters have, I want to make sure that you guys have the principles of the pitching down in this game first. So there's 2 main things that I want to talk about, and we'll just go over them very briefly. So number 1, in this game, it's very easy to hit pitches on the edges here. When you throw these pitches on the edges, hitters can really easily just jam their PCI to them, and they end up getting pretty good contact. So I'll show you that on the hitting side in just a second, and you don't always see it. Sometimes people actually accidentally jam their PCI because they're just not able to catch up to certain things. And when you throw that ball, especially at the very bottom of the zone, you're going to get lit up, especially on All-Star. So you may have noticed that you actually throw pretty good pitches if it was real life. If it was real life and you keep throwing the ball at the bottom of the zone with a sinker or something like that, you're probably going to have a pretty good ERA, probably not going to give up too many runs. Of course, hitters can start sitting down there and they will hit the ball. But right there, you saw that ball was at the very bottom of the zone. All I had to do was take the controller and smack the PCI all the way down. And it didn't take a whole lot of skill other than having to have pretty good timing on it. But in terms of controlling your PCI, a lot of hitters will fall into that trap. And if you've ever watched high-level gameplay, you'll notice that the really good players also do this quite often. They're pretty good at covering the rest of the pitches too. That's what makes them a little bit better than other hitters. But they're still players that end up jamming that PCI on those corners. So especially this low and in pitch, you want to try to avoid that. You can get away with high and in pitches, especially if someone's late on those pitches, and we'll talk about that more in just a bit. The other thing I want to talk about, you can see it right there, that the ball was way out in front of the plate when we made contact, and since the ball was on the inside half, the green zone shows up out in front of the plate. We're going to go ahead and test this theory with Abreu. So if we get an inside pitch, the green zone should show up out in front of the plate, and there you go. Most of the green zone there is out in front of the plate, and if we get a pitch on the outside half, let's see if we can get a green zone that shows up behind the plate. All right, so this ball was a little bit dead center, and it turns out that if the ball is anywhere left of center, see, most of the green zone showed out in front of the plate. If we got that ball an inch to the right, we would have had a different situation. So let's see if it shows up here. That ball was just a little bit right of center, and let's see where the green zone shows up. So there you can see that's a perfect example where most of the green zone, actually the entire green zone, was well behind the plate. And we're going to try it again right here. Let's see where the green zone shows up. And it makes sense. This is a good thing to have as part of the hitting engine. As you can see, way behind the plate, that green zone right there. So that's a good thing to have in the hitting engine when it comes to the outside and inside parts of the plate. The problem is in this game, there are only 2 blocks where if it's anywhere left of center, the green zone shows out in front, and anywhere right of center, it shows out behind. And there should be another one in the middle, kind of in between those 2. So hopefully that changed that for next year, but not really relevant what we're talking about. What I wanted to bring up there is that when you throw a pitch inside to someone and they're late on it, if you throw the exact same pitch slightly on the outside half with the exact same timing for that hitter, they will get it in the green zone. So just keep an eye out for that. And there are certain hitters like Frank Thomas whose green zone always shows up deep behind the plate. So keep that in mind as well. All right, so now let's talk about the different types of hitters. And what I want to start with is the types of hitters that always do pretty much the same thing throughout an entire at-bat. And we're also going to start from the easiest hitters to pitch to, and then going to the hardest hitters to pitch to. And then after that, we'll talk a little bit about hitters who do different things in different counts. So let's start with the easiest hitters to pitch to, which is the guys that can't square up much and they also swing at everything. And this is pretty self-explanatory. The reason that we are going to talk about some of these easy hitters to pitch to is that sometimes we overthink what we need to do, and then we end up falling into trouble. People can get lucky and get a good swing here and there. We know this game in particular, you can get a lot of bloop hits and win games. We need to make sure that we are not overthinking it, not overdoing it, and attacking the hitters we need to attack, but also making hitters get themselves out when they're trying to do that. So again, the guys who can't square up much and they swing at everything, you need to make sure that you are, first of all, attacking the zone to start. Sometimes they're just a little rusty, and over the course of the game, they start squaring stuff up, but you need to make sure you're not walking these guys, because if they can't square it up, they can't get on base if you don't just throw the pitch out of the zone. Again, if they're swinging at everything too, they probably will chase a lot of things, but you want to make sure that you make them prove that they can hit the ball first before you start walking them. So the next hitter is a little bit similar to the last one, but this is the kind of hitter that also swings at everything, but when they swing at something in the zone, they end up hitting it pretty hard. So this is that kind of player where you can start out by being aggressive, and as soon as you recognize that he is hitting that pitch in the zone every time, you need to start pitching outside of the zone. This kind of hitter ends up being someone who swings at everything in the zone and out of the zone. Obviously, if you throw it out of the zone, they're not really going to hit it too well. We know that this game, sometimes you get some home runs and hits out of the zone, and that happens in real life. The frequency isn't too disgusting, but by throwing the ball out of the zone when they swing quite a bit, you're going to get a lot of outs. So don't be too aggressive in the zone, and you might have to work backwards. If they're hitting everything the first couple batters, just start throwing junk right away. You'll be able to determine how good of a hitter they are in the first few batters, because a good hitter will tend to lay off those pitches as soon as you start throwing them off the plate, and you'll have to figure out something a little bit different. And a little bit later, we'll talk about how to get that kind of hitter out. But when you see someone that swings at everything and hits everything in the zone, just start throwing some junk. You'll see a lot of these players in BR where they don't have a really good ranked team, so they come in from playing franchise or from playing Road to the Show, and they want to just jump online. They end up playing a lot of BR, so you'll see some of these guys in that game mode. The next kind of hitter is someone who squares up every fastball. And on the surface, it might look like the person that we just talked about, but as soon as you start throwing some off speed in the zone, they start missing the baseball. So you might think that you just want to spam off speed, but over time they will adjust if you do that. So you want to use the off speed as your weapon, but you still want to keep them honest. Throw an unhittable fastball in every at bat. So something a little bit inside where they can't really touch it, but the fact that you threw the fastball makes them think that there's going to be another fastball coming later in the at bat. And maybe you don't throw another one. Maybe you just throw some off speed. They never get that fastball, and then they never get that pitch that they think they can hit. Okay, so the next type of hitter is someone who is late on every fastball. And this is kind of the opposite of what we just talked about. Now, it's kind of exactly the opposite of what you wanted to do with someone who can't hit the fastball, in that you want to use the fastball as a weapon, but you don't want to spam it, because eventually they will be able to start looking for it and time it up. You have to keep them honest with the off speed and the fastball. Kind of what we did with the guys who did square up the fastball. You want to make sure you spot the off speed here and there, but you want to use the fastball to get them out. So you can throw that off speed off the plate like we did with the fastball off the plate for the previous hitter, and then come in with that fastball inside a lot of the time to get them out. Because remember what we talked about earlier, in that if you throw a fastball and they're late on it on the inside half, a lot of times they can still catch up to it on the outside half. So you want to make sure you're going inside with that fastball late in the at-bat when you think they're going to make some contact. Now, the next type of hitter is someone who can't hit up and in pitches. So this is kind of similar to the last guy, except they can hit the fastball down low. So the last guy we talked about just couldn't hit the fastball at all, but this is the kind of guy that can hit the fastball down low in the zone. The only real hole that we're talking about is that if they have the hole up and in with the fastball. And again, this is another thing where you don't want to spam that pitch. You do want to use it as a weapon, but if you're throwing that pitch every single time, they will eventually be able to sit their PCI up and in there. What you want to try to do with these kind of hitters is keep them honest with lower than low pitches. So right there, we throw that changeup just below the zone. If they swing at it, most likely they're going to hit it on the ground. But the fact that you threw it down there makes them think that you'll throw more down there and you'll eventually miss, which you might, but that opens up the opportunity for you to come up and in here probably like once in at bat. And if they're not laying off that pitch, they will pop it up pretty often. Now we'll talk about kind of the same hitter, but someone who's less focused about not hitting the up and in pitch and more focused about crushing the low pitch. Obviously, you don't want to throw it at the bottom of the zone, and they will still struggle with that high pitch. The one thing about this kind of hitter is they might be actually jamming the PCI like we talked about earlier. So they might be able to jam the PCI low and hit that pitch, and also jam the PCI high and hit that pitch as well. The reason why I kind of bring up this hitter a little bit differently from the last one is that this is the kind of hitter that you do see a lot in both Battle Royale and ranked seasons, but you see them a lot in good players. You see a lot of good players, solid hitters, maybe not the biggest goons, but pretty solid players that can actually snowball a game for you. And it happens when you throw a lot of pitches down low in the zone, because it feels like you're throwing good pitches a lot of the time. But the fact that they're just sitting down there with their PCI waiting for the ball to come to it, these are the kind of hitters that can frustrate you and can really, like I said, snowball the game into like a mercy rule or just a game that you can't come back in. So I bring up this kind of hitter because you need to be able to identify them very quickly. And if you can, try to put as many pitches as possible at the top of the zone or well below the zone. If you throw even just a handful of pitches sometimes to these guys, they will hit it for a lot of runs and a lot of extra base hits. So this is the kind of hitter that you need to identify very quickly and try to get them out in a different way. Now the next type of hitter is actually two different kind of hitters in one, and there's two different reasons why it could happen. And this kind of hitter is someone who is early consistently on fastballs. And let me talk about the different types of hitters that they could be. Number one, if you're playing on Hall of Fame or All-Star, you might be playing against someone who was just playing on a higher difficulty. So you could be playing a BR game, and this guy is early on fastballs because he was just playing some ranked on Hall of Fame, and now he's a little bit early on every pitch. You could also be facing someone who was just playing in a major league ballpark and now switching down to a minor league park where there is no more lag that they just had to deal with. So their bat might be a little bit quicker. And in that case, you might be facing someone who's actually pretty good. They're early consistently on the fastball, and that means they're probably going to adjust down to the fastball as the game goes on. So if you see someone like pulling every pitch foul early, I would be a little bit wary and try to throw some pitches on the outside half. They'll end up probably rolling over on it a little bit at the beginning of the game, but you have to be very careful about this kind of hitter because they could be really, really good and just need time to adjust down. So that's the kind of hitter that you need to be a little bit careful with. But the other side of that is if someone's consistently early on fastballs, they could also be someone who just doesn't have the reaction time to really square up fastballs if they're not really, really anticipating it. So you could be running into someone who is early on the fastball because they have to be. And if you were to throw them a lot of off speed, they probably won't be able to adjust to it the rest of the game. Now, this is something that you can kind of figure out if you're looking at their rating online on theshownation.com, or if you saw their record coming into the game, you might be able to determine how good of a hitter they are and what you need to do to them. Basically, both of the advice that I just gave you was to throw the low and away off speed or even the away fastballs. Because remember, if they're early on the inside pitch, they're going to be early on the outside pitch too, like we talked about at the very beginning of the video. The difference that I will say between these two hitters is that for those good hitters, you don't really want to throw the inside breaking ball because when they recognize it, they will have the time to adjust from one pitch to the other. You don't really want to throw that pitch, but you can throw the inside pitch to those people that you feel like are just really trying to anticipate the fastball. They'll swing over the top of the off speed every time. So that's the difference that you can make between the two. You can throw a lot more off speed to that person who's not as good. The second difference between those two types of hitters is that the first hitter, the good hitter, will kind of evolve as the game goes on. They'll evolve into a different type of hitter, maybe someone that we already talked about or someone that we're about to talk about in a sec. Again, the reason I bring that up is that you need to make a decision on how much you're going to attack this player and with what kind of pitch, because it could be two different types of players. Now let's get on to the next hitter, which is a guess hitter. And this is the type of hitter that I am. I'm actually going to flip over to the hitting side, and I'm a guess hitter, right? So these are the types of players that try to think along with the pitcher. And if a pitcher is getting into some kind of a pattern, this is where these types of hitters really excel. So if you have some kind of pattern and you're facing against a guess hitter, you might have a little bit of trouble. So you have to be aware of what kind of patterns you're going with. This can be an interesting type of hitter as well because they end up being a little streaky. I know I'm a very streaky hitter, and they can kind of get lucky almost, or they kind of have a good stretch where they guess correctly a few times in a row and square up the baseball. And as a pitcher, you might feel like they're just hitting everything and you can't do anything about it. Or in reality, it's really that the hitter has just guessed right a few times, or you really do have some kind of tell, some kind of pattern that you've been going back to over and over. And it's less about them being super skilled and more about you needing to do something a little bit different. Because this is how I feel as a hitter. I don't have quite the reaction time that some other players have. but I can hit pretty decently because I don't miss the pitch generally that I'm looking for. I might have ugly swings here and there, but when I do get the pitch I'm looking for, I'm right on the baseball. So as a pitcher, what you want to do is you want to make sure that you're using the batter analysis as much as possible. You want to see what kind of pitches the opponent is hitting well, and you want to see what count they're hitting them in. You want to see how many times you're throwing a certain pitch in a certain location. So you want to both evaluate your own pattern, and you want to evaluate their hitting pattern as well. Sometimes you can go into the pitcher analysis or batter analysis. You can see a bunch of greens low and in for left-handed hitters, or a bunch of greens up and in for right-handed hitters or something like that. And then you see a bunch of reds clumped up in a certain area. So that's where you know where the opponent's getting a lot of hits and where they're getting out a lot of the time. This is also kind of nice for those kind of hitters that end up smashing the ball at the bottom of the zone. You may not notice it right away, but if you use that batter analysis tool, which I'll show you later in this video, you may see that they're clumping up all their hits at the bottom of the zone, and you can get some outs at the top of the zone as well. It's just a great tool that you should be using as a pitcher. Now, the final type of hitter that we're going to go with, I'll talk about in a second, but just realize that if you play someone who's really, really good, just keep in mind that baseball kind of rewards good hitting over good pitching. So you can throw some great pitches and still get beat. When you're facing really good players, the best defense is a good offense. This last type of hitter is someone who smashes everything on the edges of the zone, and it seems like they lay off a lot of pitches off the plate as well. Remember, we mentioned this kind of person earlier in the video. Now, there's a few things to think about for this kind of hitter. Number one, they're usually pretty good hitters. If they're hitting everything at the edge of the zone, they probably have really good reaction time. They're just good at the game. They have a lot of experience, and they have really good timing to go with the pitch. Now, for that hitter that we talked about before that swung at everything even when it was off the plate, if they beat you at that point, it's because you're throwing too many strikes. It's not necessarily the same thing for this kind of hitter, because if you were to throw more pitches out of the zone, they would probably take walks. So you don't want to throw any fewer strikes than you already are, but you need to throw it a little bit differently. Sometimes this can come down to you getting behind in the count and then having to throw pitches on the plate where they're looking for it, or if they're just looking dead red for a fastball, they can just jam the PCI to the corner and square it up, get some extra base hits there. Most of the time, if they're completely impossible to get out, there's two reasons for this. Number one, they're just a really good player. Number two, it happens a lot with certain starting pitchers for you. I've seen this happen a lot with Garrett Cole, who's a really good 99 overall pitcher, but sometimes he just doesn't have the out pitch or sometimes the control that you want him to have, and he gets behind on hitters, or he snowballs and his confidence lets him get hit around. And you'll see this happen for certain starting pitchers, and sometimes there's not too much you can do about it. You can either replace that pitcher out of your rotation for the next game, or you can try to pitch with them a little bit differently. Or sometimes it's just a matter of having to face a different opponent who doesn't match up well against that starting pitcher. You're going to see this way more at the top level of gameplay rather than your average opponents. And you can see it in BR from time to time. But when that happens in BR, it's usually because the PCIs are so big and it's a little bit easier to make contact on the edges. So what I do against this kind of hitter is I throw two pitches right down the middle. And if you throw more than that, they will adjust to it. But if you throw two in a row in the middle of the zone, you're kind of making them readjust what they're trying to do. And that's all you're trying to do as a pitcher. All you're trying to do as a pitcher is trying to get the hitter to adjust. And sometimes if you just make them look at the middle of the zone a little bit more, it will make them not be able to expand to the edges anymore. Now that they're kind of looking towards the middle of the zone a little bit more, you can go ahead and throw those pitches on the edges. At least for a little while, they won't be able to hit it. They might end up smashing the PCI to the edges a little bit after that, but you can go back and forth. As soon as they start making good contact on those edge pitches again, you can throw a couple more pitches down the middle. And it's not really a matter of you pitching poorly at that point. It's just a matter of the way that the game works. And hopefully they change it a little bit for next year. Tune that part of the game as well. So now we're going to get here into a BR game. And I want to talk a little bit about hitters that hit a little bit differently in different counts. And the first kind of hitter that you might encounter is someone who doesn't really swing at the first pitch unless it's down the middle or right where they're looking for it. You don't see too many people who do this for an entire game. You might see it here and there, but if you do end up encountering someone who likes to take the first pitch on the majority of batters, you still want to make sure that you're mixing it up. Those kind of batters you do want to throw first pitch strike basically every time, but you want to split it between fastballs and off speed, because you can end up facing someone who takes that first pitch sometimes, but as soon as they get that fastball they're looking for, they hit a first pitch home run. So you don't want to be in between on those guys. You may encounter some people who also are pretty selective until it gets to 2 strikes and they just start swinging at everything. And you might notice that kind of person also on pitches in the dirt, they tend to foul off a lot of pitches. And a lot of times if that happens, they could be using a contact swing, especially if they're getting pretty weak foul tips. So those are people that you want to make sure that you're attacking. As soon as you see someone hit a pitch in the dirt, you want to try to be aggressive in the zone, because if they're using a contact swing, they're not going to do a ton of damage. You want to make sure that you're not walking those kind of hitters. Now you can kind of see the opposite, and you kind of want to be able to determine whether a hitter likes to swing on certain counts, like 2-0 or 3-0 or things like that. I've encountered some good players who get ahead in the count, but then as soon as they get to 2-0, they will expand the zone on a not as good hittable pitch, but they do end up getting to those counts. You have to realize that sometimes you can exploit them in counts that you wouldn't really expect to be able to get people out. Now, a hitter that you will see kind of often, especially late in games, are hitters that will go opposite field with 2 strikes. And I try to do this a little bit where early in the count, I will try to turn on the ball, but then late in the count, I'll try to go the other way so that I don't end up striking out, but can also cover the fastball and cover the off speed on the same pitch. As a guess hitter, I don't like to try to cover both on the same pitch, except for with 2 strikes. Now, the way to get that kind of hitter out is to throw aggressively inside with the 4-seam on 2 strikes, but it's not necessarily something you want to default to early in the game. You have to make sure that they're proving that they're going the other way with fastballs first before you start throwing that pitch, because otherwise it's a little bit easy to pick up. Certain hitters will just destroy that ball even on 2 strikes. Another thing I want to talk about before we end this video is that there are certain hitters in lineups that hit differently than others. So you may come across someone using like a Mike Piazza, who I always talk about as a guy with a bit of a long swing. He's got really good hitting ratings, so if you throw the wrong pitch to him, especially like breaking balls off speed, either inside or away, he can hit that pitch. One pitch that Mike Piazza struggles with the average hitter is the fastball inside. So even if someone's pretty good at turning on pitches, they may not be able to do it with every single hitter in the lineup. So just keep an eye out. We talked earlier about Frank Thomas having a deep green zone. So he's a guy who's really good at hitting the inside pitches, although some people aren't used to how much you have to wait back for that pitch. So you just have to keep an eye on, you kind of have to learn the different types of swings for different hitters. We got 2 more things to talk about. The next one is tunneling, and that if you throw certain pitches with the same release point, they can go to different parts of the zone. So you can throw a fastball at the same release point as a slider, and they'll end up going to different parts of the zone, but out of the hand, they look identical to the batter. So that's a very valuable way to pitch. And I'll drop a link to Pitching Ninja on Twitter to kind of give you a good explanation, a good visual explanation of what exactly that is. Now, the final thing I want to talk about is overthinking and facing players who adjust versus players who don't. And I'll go back to Mike Piazza for this example, because I played a couple games recently where I faced Mike Piazza against a guy who was decent, but not a very top player or anything like that. And I was able to abuse his Mike Piazza for the entire game just by throwing fastballs inside. And I didn't change a thing. Every time Mike Piazza came up, I threw a fastball inside, got him out 4 times. Then I played a player who was pretty good. I saw from the difference in these 2 guys' records that one player was much better than the other. And they both ended up using Mike Piazza. Now, the second guy that I played, I did the same thing. I threw the fastball inside to Piazza over and over. I got him out 3 times in a row. The first 3 times that Mike Piazza came up, I threw that fastball inside and I got him out. Now, the last time that Piazza card came up, I threw the fastball again. It was a walk-off. I gave up a walk-off right there. And the difference was that a player was willing to adjust. He had seen through the first 8.5 innings the way that I was trying to get that Mike Piazza card out. He was absolutely ready for that pitch that time, and he beat me with that. So my point there is the better hitters will often adjust. And if I had thrown him a different pitch, he probably wouldn't have been able to cover it on that one because he was ready for that one. And as we talked about earlier, I did the same thing against a lesser player and was able to get him out every time. Against a better player, he adjusted. So it kind of works both ways. You need to adjust to better players, but you also need to make sure that you're not overdoing it and overthinking against a lesser hitter. Because if I had thrown an off speed away or an off speed inside to the guy I got out every time, he probably would have hit that home run. So just make sure that you're not overthinking it, but you have to recognize when you do need to make a change. So this guy that I'm playing right here has lined out about 5 times already in this game. We're going to try to see if we can beat him based on what we've seen in this game. I've noticed that he's hit the low ball very, very well. So I'm going to go upstairs a few times in this inning. This pitcher's not very good, so he hangs that one right there. I just needed one at bat before I go to Rob Nen. That ball was left right over the middle of the plate. So I'm actually noticing that this guy is hitting everything in the zone, but if I do throw the pitch out of the zone, he is chasing quite a bit. So this is kind of one of those first hitters that we talked about earlier today. He has smashed everything that I've put in the zone. But I'm going to try to make him chase a little bit later in this inning. This time he gets to that swing. And we're not going to be very aggressive here. He's got Miguel Sano. We're going to try to get him to chase a little bit, but Rob Nen's been hanging some pitches. This is a very, very good example of someone who smashes everything in the zone, but swings a little too much. Because this guy's lined out about 6 or 7 times in this game. We do end up winning the game because I recognized at least a little bit later than I should have that he was smashing everything but swinging at everything. This is a perfect example of that second guy that we talked about in this video. So I just wanted to round out that video, guys, with a BR game so you can see how it plays online. And I want to kind of hammer home the point that this video might be a lot of things that you've already done. You already know how to get these hitters out, especially if you've played baseball or watched a lot of baseball in your life. There are certain ways to get certain hitters out. For this video in particular, what I want you to do is to recognize the different types of hitters so that early in the game you can kind of make a decision on how you want to pitch them and kind of categorize them so that by the time you get to the 7th, 8th, or 9th inning, you know how to get them out already. And the flip side is that if you don't adjust to what type of hitter they are early, you can end up getting snowballed and getting into a mercy situation more often than you would like. Because 99% of hitters in this game have some kind of weakness. And like I said, if you play a really good player, sometimes they are almost impossible to get out. You just have to outslug them. But for most hitters, there is a way to exploit them a little bit. So you want to be able to categorize them, break it down, and just stick to the way that you want to get them out. Now, like I said before, I wanted to talk at the end of the video about what we're going to be doing with content on this channel moving forward, because we've kind of milked as much of the hitting tips and pitching tips videos as much as we possibly could. There's not a whole lot more to do with it, although when they do come up, I will absolutely put them on this channel. I will do as many tips as I can when I feel like it's necessary. But for me to be more consistent on YouTube, along with Twitch, I wanted to do a little bit more than just that. So with a couple leagues that I'm running for Diamond Dynasty, I will put some highlight videos up here. I will be doing some quicker tips and also some game series as well. So we'll have a lot of fun with that as well. It won't just be tips videos. The other thing I want to mention is that when I started doing YouTube videos for MLB The Show, there wasn't a whole lot of similar content to what I was doing. But now if you were to go and look up all the different creators, all the really good players that are now on YouTube, I'm talking about Sebrev, I'm talking about Pitching Rebel, of course, and Migunsky. They've been very consistent on YouTube recently as well. All these really good players have started to put out tips videos that I think if you've been watching my videos, it probably got you to a certain point, and now these really good players have the best possible tips up on YouTube, and I want to make sure that you guys are able to consume that content as well. And they've kind of surpassed anything that I can bring you at this point in terms of tips. So I'm going to shout out all the guys below in the description that you should be subscribed to if you're still interested in getting better at the game. I, of course, will have my own perspectives and my own tips going forward, but there will be more than just that on this channel. And while I haven't been consuming their content as much, I will be watching those videos in particular, and make sure to follow me on Twitter because I will always share those tips videos from whatever great creators there are here on YouTube. And I think at the moment, if you really like my content, I think you'll really enjoy Sebrev's content, #1. And of course, I'm going to link the rest of those guys in the description as well. But be on the lookout for a little bit different of a look for 2020. Of course, we always stream every weekday on Twitch, so be sure to follow me there. Of course, Twitter and Discord are the best places to reach me when I'm not streaming. And I look forward to a big 2020 and big new decade with all of you. And I will see you soon.